Okay, today we are going to talk about Chapter 6, Lesson 3, about the development of Judaism. So we left off last time talking about how the Jews had been forced to leave Judah because the Chaldeans had come in and conquered them, right? And so they were exiled and had to leave and live in Babylon for about 70 years until the Chaldeans were then beaten by the next group to come in. So before I get to that, let me just say that it is during this time of exile that they start to be called Jews, and the religion that they're following is called Judaism. So that comes back with them, and that, of course, sticks that name. Okay, so before that, remember, they were Israelites, and now we get the term Jews. All right, so, and while they're in their captivity or their exile, they are not in their homeland with their temple, right? Their temple was destroyed, so they meet in what they are called synagogues or Jewish houses of worship, and they continue their religion going even though they've been exiled. They meet weekly to worship, to pray, and to dedicate their thoughts and feelings to God. And so that's called the Sabbath. And it is supposed to be from sundown on Friday to nightfall on Saturday. Okay. All right. So the Persians are the ones who come in and conquer the Chaldeans. Cyrus II is the leader, and he decides to let the Jews go home if they want back to Judah. So, it's been a long time. So some people did stay and they'd, made a new life for themselves, but a lot of the Jews wanted to go back to their homeland. So they did. And their goal there is to rebuild Jerusalem, because remember, it was destroyed by the Chaldeans, and to build a new temple. So the new temple is called creatively the Second Temple. Even though the Persians are still controlling them, right? They are not allowed to have their own king. The Persians are still going to tax them and rule them. So they want to keep their religion going, and they look to their priests and the scribes, who are scholars, right? Religious scholars, as their leaders internally. And so you see a lot of them staying together and still meeting in synagogues and schools set up and everything. So their culture is going, but they look to their own kind of leadership. Okay. All right. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the Hebrew Bible. So there are 24 books, they call them, in the Hebrew Bible. It's a collection of a lot of different things, a lot of laws about how they're supposed to live and rules to follow. There are also, there's, depending on what part you're talking about, there's a lot about their culture. So there's history, there's literature, poetry, art, even proverbs, things like that. So in the Torah, the first part is 5 books. And it was said that they were written down by a scribe led by Ezra, who got the scribes to write them down. And your book goes ahead and, defines scrolls. I think you probably know, as a scroll is just like parchments that have been sewn together, so it's really long. And so when you see the Torah, you see a really long scroll rather than a book, even though they use the word book, okay? And so in this, I'm not going to go through each of the 5 books, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. And then this one, the book of Genesis, is the first one, and it's one of the ones that's pretty famous, I think. Your book just picked out a few things to tell you, and obviously you can't go through a whole religion specifically and the whole Bible. So I will just point out that these are some famous stories that I'm sure you've heard of. Like, for instance, look at the picture, like Noah's Ark, and the idea that, God created the earth in 6 days and then rested on the 7th. And then when he gets frustrated with mankind and he thinks he needs to kind of like start over, he has Noah gather 2 of every animal, right? And he, floods the rest of the world to basically, kill everything and start over, right? Um, and the rainbow there supposedly is supposed to be that, to show that, if you follow his ways this time, and this will never happen again, right? All right, and there's a bunch of different stories explaining why things are the way they are. One of my favorite is the city of Babel, which is supposed to explain why people speak different languages, which is an interesting theory, right? That is a good question. Why would people speak different languages? So this is an explanation story. I have an Edpuzzle for you about it. I think it's creative, so I'll leave that one for your Edpuzzle. But this is a famous painting that someone made of what this tower up to heaven might have looked like. But it's just, of course, their idea, the artist's view. So I won't ruin that story for you. You'll have to go watch the Edpuzzle. Then the second part of the Bible is called the prophets, the writing of the prophets. And then the last one's called the writings. I'm sorry, the second one is all about the prophets, and then the third one's called the writings. Again, there's a lot of different things in here, but one of them is called the Book of Daniel. And I think one of the stories you might have heard of is about Daniel and the lion's den, they call it. This book is all about how if you are, a believer, like evil will be replaced eventually with good, and all suffering can be over if you are a believer. So in this example of Daniel, the Chaldeans had sent Daniel to punishment to be fed to the lions, and they purposely, this is actually a punishment they have at that time, that they would purposely have the animals starving, right? So they'd be desperate to eat whatever was thrown down there, or whoever in this case, but supposedly God protected him and he was not eaten. Okay, so because of his loyalty. So I have an Edpuzzle for you on that one too. All right, so one of the interesting things that's in the Torah is a set of dietary laws. There's actually rules God set down for what they could eat, how they should act, what they could wear, things like that. So the dietary laws are something that's pretty interesting. They were told that they could not eat beef and lamb. They could eat beef and lamb, but not pork. And there's reasons for that. And I have another Edpuzzle for you on that, explaining why that is. But here's a little diagram to see kind of what they're allowed to eat and what they can't. In addition to that, they don't eat dairy products with their meat. They don't mix them. And so in the Edpuzzle, you'll see that, that means like no cheeseburgers, right? Because you can't have your meat with cheese. So all these ideas, these laws for how to eat were put in the Torah, and you were taught them. So kashrut is when you're, that's proper food etiquette, basically, like how to eat correctly. And if you do it correctly, then you're showing your obedience to God. And so if someone keeps kosher, that means that they follow these rules, these dietary rules. And so there's a lot of rules for them to follow. You can't use even the same utensils and plates with meat and dairy products. They have 2 of everything, even 2 dishwashers. There's a lot of rules, so you can watch the Edpuzzle to see about that. And kids always ask me, do you have to do these things? Well, it's just like all other religions, right? You either, how strictly you follow your religion, is up to you and your family and your beliefs. So not all Jews follow these rules. It's some do and some don't. So it's a personal choice. The other thing I didn't mention is you can't eat shellfish. So I know some of you will be sad that you wouldn't be able to eat your crab dinner or, fancy seafood. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention is Seder is a famous meal that's eaten over Passover, and I have a video on that one too. Remember, Passover is the celebration of the Exodus, right, of the Jewish people being allowed to leave finally their slavery in Egypt. So Seder is a famous meal, and there's a picture here of what it might look like. Usually you have a special plate in your family, and it doesn't, I don't know if it looks that delicious to you. This is more of like a representative meal. This isn't like the actual whole dinner you would eat, but there are special things like there's usually salt water, and if you dip some of the food in the salt water, it's supposed to be like your tears from all the Jews bitter experience and things like that, right? So the foods are supposed to be representative, and also there's very ceremonial. The youngest child who's there will ask a series of questions, and it's kind of like a call and response, like the family members answer and they recite the answers together. So it's all about like not forgetting and celebrating their heritage and what they've been through. Okay, I'll have a video on that too.